It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. The music played softly, guests filled the decorated hall, and the bride, glowing in her white dress, held tightly to her bouquet. But behind the smiles and the celebration, something wasn't right. In the middle of all the laughter and greetings, one woman stood quietly in the corner, her presence ignored, her eyes filled with sadness. She was the bride's mother, a simple woman from the village, wearing modest clothes and a gentle smile that went unnoticed by most. From the very beginning, the groom's family had made it clear they didn't want her there. She wasn't elegant enough, didn't speak the way they did, and certainly didn't fit in with their polished image. Though she had raised her daughter with love the bride stood still, her eyes locked on her mother's. The groom's family smiled, assuming everything was going as planned. But they didn't notice the tears forming in the bride's eyes, or the decision building in her heart. What happened next left the entire hall speechless and turned a wedding day into something no one would ever forget. The bride stood frozen, her fingers tightening around her bouquet. Everyone in the hall was watching her now, waiting for her to take that final step forward. The groom looked confused, his smile faltering slightly. His mother whispered something sharply behind him, her eyes darting toward the woman sitting quietly at the back, the bride's mother. That same simple woman who had walked miles just to attend her daughter's wedding, wearing her best dress, even though it was old and worn at the edges. But no one knew what this woman had been through. She had worked tirelessly for years, cleaning houses, doing odd jobs, going without meals just to make sure her daughter had a chance at a better life. It was her sacrifices that paid for the bride's schooling, for her books, for the very dress she was wearing now. But none of that seemed to matter to the groom's family. They hadn't even acknowledged her when she walked in. Instead, they scoffed at her simple clothes and humble background, calling her unfit to be part of their elite circle. The bride remembered it all. How her fiance's mother insisted that her own mother not be seated in the front row. How they asked her to tell her mother to stay quiet and not embarrass anyone. She had tried to overlook it, thinking maybe it was just nerves, maybe things would get better. But now, standing at the edge of this moment, she wasn't so sure anymore. The guests started murmuring among themselves. Some were curious, others confused. A few of the groom's relatives exchanged annoyed glances, wondering what the delay was. But the bride wasn't listening to anyone. Her eyes remained on her mother, who was still sitting quietly, pretending not to notice the stares and whispers. She remembered the words her mother once said, "Never forget where you came from." And right now, those words echoed louder than anything else. The room was silent, holding its breath. And deep down, everyone could feel something was about to change. They just didn't know how, or how far it would go. The bride took a slow step back instead of forward. That one small movement sent a wave of confusion through the crowd. The officiant paused, glancing at the groom, who now looked visibly uneasy. The bride's hands trembled slightly, but her eyes never left her mother. She was remembering all the little moments, the nights her mother stayed up sewing her school uniforms, the mornings they shared tea before work, the day she helped her get ready for her university interview even though she had no idea what formal wear looked like. Meanwhile, in the front row, the groom's mother leaned over to whisper something harshly to her husband. Her lips curled with disapproval, her arms folded tightly. She had made it clear from the start that she didn't approve of the bride's background. "She's sweet, yes," she once said, "but she comes from nothing. And her mother? She's too plain, too simple. What will people say?" To her, appearances meant everything: status, connections, family names. Love, to her, was never enough. In the corner of the hall, a childhood friend of the bride, Mira, watched the scene unfold with concern. She knew the bride better than anyone. She had seen how much she had tried to bridge the gap between the two families, how she forced smiles during the engagement dinner when whispers circled the table, how she pretended not to hear when the groom's aunt called her mother a village woman. But Mira also knew the bride's heart. She had always stood for the people she loved, even if it meant standing alone. Back near the entrance, two of the groom's cousins exchanged smirks. "Told you this would be a mess," one muttered. "She doesn't belong in this kind of family." The bride could hear bits of the chatter now, the low murmurs creeping in like fog. Her heart pounded louder with every second. Her gaze shifted between her groom, his family, and the mother who had given her everything. A storm of thoughts raced through her mind, and as the tension in the hall thickened, the bride knew this wasn't just about a wedding anymore. It was about a choice, one that would change everything. The air in the hall grew heavier with every passing second. The bride's silence spoke louder than any words. People began shifting in their seats, glancing nervously at each other. The groom finally stepped forward, reaching out his hand gently. "Come on," he whispered, trying to smile. "Everyone's waiting." But the bride didn't move. She looked at his hand, then slowly turned her eyes toward his family, their stiff expressions, their quiet judgment. His mother avoided eye contact, her lips pressed into a thin line, arms still tightly crossed. The bride's grip on her bouquet tightened. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears, drowning out the quiet hum of whispers around her. She saw the way her mother kept her head down, pretending not to see, pretending not to feel. That was her mother's way: silent strength, never complaining, always enduring. But why should she keep pretending? Why should love come with conditions? The groom leaned in closer, voice lower this time. "Let's not create a scene," he said. "We'll talk about it later, after the ceremony." But it was already too late. The scene had already begun, quietly unraveling in front of everyone. From the back of the hall, Mira stood now, as if ready to step in. But she didn't. She knew this wasn't her moment. This was the bride's fight, one that had been building for years, between love and pride, truth and appearance, loyalty and fear. Suddenly, one of the groom's relatives whispered a little too loudly, "She's clearly not ready." "Told you this match was a mistake." The words floated through the air like poison, and the bride heard them clearly. Her eyes darted to the back of the hall again, toward her mother. Still quiet, still waiting. The bride felt something shift in her chest, a kind of clarity that came with pain. She looked up, straight into the eyes of the groom's mother. No more pretending, no more holding back. Everyone in the hall leaned forward slightly, sensing it that something explosive was just a breath away. No one knew what she was about to do, but they all knew it would change everything. The bride took a slow breath, her eyes still locked with the groom's mother. But just as she opened her mouth to speak, another voice rang out from the back of the hall, a voice no one expected to hear. It was her uncle, her mother's older brother, standing tall with a serious look on his face. Dressed in modest clothes like his sister, he had stayed quiet until now. But something in his eyes had changed. "I think everyone should know the truth before this marriage goes any further," he said firmly, walking forward. The room went silent again, this time heavier, more uncertain. The bride turned sharply, confused. Even her mother looked up, startled. The groom's family stiffened. The father narrowed his eyes, clearly annoyed. "This isn't the time or place for drama," he muttered. But the uncle kept walking, his steps steady. "I didn't want to say anything. I came here to support my niece, but watching my sister be insulted, treated like she doesn't belong here, no, that I can't stay silent about." Now the tension had shifted, thicker and hotter. People leaned in, curious, whispering rapidly. The bride's heart pounded harder. What truth? What was happening? The uncle stopped near the front, facing the guests. This simple woman you keep looking down on? She's the reason this bride even has a future. But there's something else, something none of you know. He paused, glancing briefly at the groom. This young man, so perfect in your eyes. He came to our house months ago, not to ask for my niece's hand, but to ask us to hide something. For him, the bride gasped. The groom's face turned pale. His mother sat up straight, her face frozen. Whispers turned into a wave of low voices. Something big was unfolding now, something no one had expected. I kept quiet to protect my niece, the uncle continued, but I won't let her marry into a family built on lies and pride. The bride's knees felt weak, her world shifted. Again, she had come close to walking away, but now, she needed to know the whole truth before she took another step. The hall was silent. Everyone stared at the uncle, waiting for him to continue. The groom stepped forward, his voice shaking. Slightly. That's enough, he said quickly. He's trying to create confusion. None of this is true, but his eyes betrayed him. The bride saw the fear in them, the same fear she missed before. Her uncle looked directly at her, his voice calm, but firm. He asked us to cover up a past engagement, one that ended because the girl's family discovered something shady. He begged us not to say a word, said it would ruin things with your mother-in-law if she found out. The bride looked at the groom, her heart breaking all over again. Is that true? She asked, voice low but steady. The groom didn't answer right away. He glanced at his parents, but they offered no help. His mother looked stunned. His father clenched his jaw. Then, finally, the groom sighed. Yes, he muttered, barely audible. It happened before we met. I didn't think it mattered. The bride's face hardened. It's not the past that matters. It's the lies, the pretending, the way you let them treat my mother like she was nothing. Then she turned to the crowd, her voice suddenly stronger. Everyone talks about status, background, who fits into what family, but none of you would be here if it weren't for the woman you ignored all day, the one who raised me, protected me, and taught me how to stand up for myself. A quiet tear rolled down her cheek. She walked over to her mother and gently took her hand. The crowd watched in silence as she turned back to the front. I can't marry into a family that doesn't respect the people I love, she said clearly. This wedding is over. Gasps filled the hall. But just as people began reacting, the bride's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her expression shifting. She showed it to her uncle. His face changed. It was a message from someone unexpected, the groom's former fiancé, and what she had to say would shake everything they thought they knew. The bride stared at the phone screen, her hands still trembling. The message was clear, short, and powerful. Thank you for walking away. He wasn't honest with me either. You deserve better. It was from the groom's former fiancé, confirming everything her uncle had just revealed and more. The bride looked up at the groom, who now stood frozen, speechless in front of everyone. His mother sat motionless, her pride cracked wide open, and his father avoided everyone's gaze. There was nothing left to say. The bride turned to her mother and wrapped her arms around her tightly. The simple woman who had been made to feel small all day now stood at the center of the hall, held in the embrace of the daughter she raised with strength, values, and dignity. For the first time, people truly saw her not for her clothes or her background, but for the love and courage she represented. Mira rushed forward, holding the bride's other hand, offering silent support. Let's go, she whispered, and, just like that, with her head held high and her mother beside her, the bride walked out of the wedding hall, not in shame, not in fear, but in freedom. Later that evening, as they sat quietly at home, the bride looked at her mother. I didn't lose anything today, she said softly. I gained something stronger. My voice, the uncle smiled from across the room. And maybe you saved someone else too. The story made its way through the village and beyond. People didn't just talk about the cancelled wedding, they talked about the brave bride who chose truth over image, and the simple mother who raised her with quiet strength. Not all happy endings come wrapped in gold and roses. Sometimes, they come in moments of truth, in the courage to walk away, and in the deep love that never demands attention, but always stands firm. And that day, a woman once rejected for being too simple became the symbol of something far greater: dignity, honesty, and the kind of love that no rich wedding hall could ever measure.